Welcome, everybody. This is Bill St. Cyr and
This is Sue Scavo.
People of the Dream. As you know, I've been doing this series of videos on YouTube here and for Spotify. And we saw that there was an older video from almost 10 years ago that we did on the meanings of dreams. It was a webinar, a live webinar we did that actually had 11,000 views.
Which was totally shocking for us. We're like, what?
We forgot it was out there. So we've been talking about doing one together. I've done a bunch of videos solo, and we've been wanting to do some videos together. And thought we'd go back and watch that video. So we did that last night and wanted to talk about that today. So was there more that you wanted to say about that?
I mean, I was just thinking about how it was really surprising to see it. It was really surprising to see what we talked about. And we also talked about a couple of dreams. Like I talked about two of my dreams and you talked about one of your dreams. And it was really surprising, that part of it. So, which is why one of the things we want to do is like talk about those dreams again 10 years later, which we thought would be interesting.
So you want me to start with my dream?
Yeah.
So in my dream, there's a bomb that I'm diffusing, and I'm like, I apparently know how to do this. It's like one of those things with the timer and the wires, and I've got some equipment, and it's like something out of a movie where there's this like deadline, and I don't remember whether I give up at some point or just like this other male figure comes in and asks me to go have a beer with him, and I'm like, okay, and we just go off, and I think in the dream we actually go to a bar and have a beer. Am I remembering that right? Do you remember more? And I think the way that we worked it back then was pretty good. I think one of the things that's really changed for me over the last 10 years is much more of an understanding of trauma and abuse. And I think that I would have so what I did in the videos, I talked about the fear that I have and that sort of behavior of trying to like manage things or control things by diffusing situations versus like what I end up doing in the dream, which is just walking away and being with the animus and having a beer and letting it all go, which is something I learned to do over a long period of time. I think nowadays, if I had a dream like that or someone else brought me a dream, I would have just spent a little bit more time with, well, what's the bomb for you? Like, where is that? So it's not just the behavior of diffusing. When you don't really be with what the bomb is, then I did become a bit of a controlling person. I did become a person who liked to manage my environments. But there wasn't any conversation about like, well, what were the bombs that went off in your life? And immediately, even right now, like a couple experiences come up. One later in life where a community that I was part of, actually the original Dreamwork community that I was part of, kind of blew up. And then I lost my brother when I was 17. And I think that was another place in my life where I learned to deal with things by myself. Part of what was really different for me in the dream was that there was somebody there for me that knew how to be with me, that knew in some way to say, hey, you don't need to deal with this all by yourself. Also, you can't change it. I think there was a part of me that on some very, fantasy level wanted to make it all go away, wanted to make it have not blown up when really the explosion had already happened. So I think that's the biggest thing for me. Was there questions that you had about that or other thoughts?
Well, one of the things that was in the dream that
we have two cats here. One of them's playing in a bag in the background. So if you hear that noise, that's what that is.
So the only other thing that came up for me around your dream was that the bomb was beginning to glow red.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's something about like when things amp up. That was an interesting sort of thought for me.
That was after I left it, though, right? Am I remembering that right? Or was it before I left it?
I think it was before you left it. And so when he came to say, come have a beer, you're like, I can't. It's about to blow. I mean, I could be wrong. But But no matter where it was, whether it was like right before or after, there was something about it, like it glowing red. So there's something about that too, like when things got hot, red hot or something.
So how would you have worked with that?
I think I would have asked, like, I might have asked a question like, when does that happen for you? Like, especially when you try to attend it and then it starts to get worse or starts to glow. Like, what is that feeling of like, it's not just like a bomb, it's like actually glowing red. What is that? Do you know that experience in your life in any place? And how have you dealt with it?
Right. Yeah, I'm a little bit unclear about the dream memory, but what you're saying is very like familiar because no amount of managing or diffusing ever made any of those situations better with my brother or my previous marriages, even in our marriage when I tried to diffuse things. We talked about our relationship dynamics in that movie, in that video also. I mean, it never actually, I mean, in the dream, I feel like I'm making headway. Like I feel like I know what I'm doing, but I guess that's part of the illusion, right? Like you think you're actually doing it, but really it's going to blow or it's already blown on some level. And I think that's a familiar pattern for me of like the more I tinker with it, the more it glows. Me tinkering with it never made anything glow less, it never made anything not blow up.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing to point out. I appreciate that. I mean, I think I've learned to walk away. I think I've learned to just like let it blow or, I've learned to be like, do what I know how to do, but not really diffuse things. I mean, obviously there's some levels that diffusing things is okay, but on that level of it being more like a trauma response or a response to abuse in my life, it never really helped.
Right. And then the other thing is like having somebody say like, come on, we can just go, like, and have it be such a chill. I mean, you're not one to go to a bar and have a beer, like.
Especially not that. I think I was drinking even less back then.
Right. So there's something about also like sort of sweet, kind of like, I don't know, male energy. Like, did you have that anywhere? That was that kind of like, you don't have to do it and you don't even have to worry about it. Like, just come and have a beer with me.
I mean, that was, so the two examples of the Dreamwork community were both examples where I lost that.
Right.
Like, one, my brother died. The other, I had a teacher who I felt like the dynamic got abusive for me. So the short answer is no. I mean, the short answer is like the places I had that the most. I had a sweet relationship with my dad, but we weren't close in that kind of a way. He didn't know how to mentor me for what I don't think he really I was a very different kind of person than he was, and he didn't really know. I was just like kind of this alien being to him.
Right.
I mean, he was there at times when I needed it.
But not in the way in the dream, right?
Not in relationship to this issue. Like he didn't know how to be with me around this kind of fear and tension.
Right. So there's something about like, when we were talking about like, oh, we would have talked about it differently, like opening both those pieces a little bit more, like the trauma and what is the bomb, and also because that helps to put into context what it means to have somebody say like, you can just leave that and it's not yours to do and just come have a beer with me. Like it makes that it brings that into like a bigger healing or something. Like it creates like a bigger space for you to be grounded in that healing because it heals at so many layers.
Yeah, one of the things you talked about last night that makes me think about is like we both, in talking about our dreams, there was a little bit of a lack of gravity. So like I didn't really, when I worked that dream in that video, and we might have been self-conscious being on camera, I've gotten much more comfortable in myself.
God. You're so self-conscious. I'm like, don't go watch it. You should probably watch it, but if you want to.
11,000 views. So
somebody's watched it.
A little late to tell people that. But there was like a skipping over both the gravity of the bomb and kind of what I'd been through at times in my life, and Also, like, yeah, you talk about like going with somebody for a beer, like that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when you put it together with like what that really means for me to have that kind of feeling of like male energy or some aspect of God, some angel of God coming and being with me is, I feel that in a way that I don't. I mean, I may have felt it, but I didn't feel it doing the video. I didn't talk about it. We didn't go in to the depth that we're going into it now.
Right.
So I love that. I mean, it's an interesting thing about dreams, about how like 10 years later, the dream's still totally present for me.
I was thinking about that too. It was interesting to go back 10 years and see, well, one, what was happening for me in that year that we did the video, but how like you can take this like long view of our work and you can see the threads that move through. So you can see the threads of your work, sort of like they're still those two threads are still being woven in your work, I think.
Yeah.
And same for me, like very much so. Do you want me to talk about my dream now?
Yeah. I mean, can I say one thing in response to that?
Sure.
Because I love that idea of like it's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is like we tend to focus on figuring out a dream versus like what you were just talking about it's the work that we do with dreams is part of this lifelong journey. I love that. I think so. I think when we talk about your dream too, it's also like, it's not just like we're talking about your dream, we're talking about you, we're talking about your life.
Right. So when people say like, what does this dream mean and what's it trying to teach me right now? It's like how does the dream want to teach us now and give us experiences and stories to work with now? But it's weaving a larger story of who we are, who we've been, which opens a door to like, coming into or moving forward into like the possibility of who we can be. So there is this like, when I work with people and and we're looking at a specific dream and how it's affecting their specific lives right now, I'm always trying to do like this, well, what's the bigger story? I think of it as like a tapestry. What part of the tapestry are we working on? Or what part is being woven? What new part of the tapestry is being woven in the conversation that the dream is having with the dreamer?
Cool. So you want to talk about your dream now?
Segues right into my dream.
It does segue right into your
unintentionally.
Dream. Well, in a way, they all do. So
my dream, I just want to say it was so shocking, the dream, to hear me talk about this dream because I had no memory of it. And so when I was listening to myself talk about this dream, I was like, oh yeah. And what I remember most is the very end of the dream. The dream is this, that I'm standing with an archetype. It's a male figure. And he's teaching me about these two realities. I'm not going to say exactly right, but like I said in the first one, but that there's this like, and I did this cute little graph. We had a whiteboard. So I drew a little circle, and in that little circle I drew me. And then there's this big, huge circle that couldn't even fit on the whiteboard that was around me, that was also me. And in the first part of the dream, this male teacher, guide, divine angel, archetype, whatever you want to call him, he was teaching about how like when we have a lot of grief or when we're in a lot of pain, we're in this like we're in this place that's very contained, and that it's really important to remember that there's this other reality that's also around us. So he was very specific about like, I think he was talking a lot about grief because I was dealing with a lot of grief at the time. So he kept saying there's this little grief. When we're in our grief, it feels like this, but we have to, the trick is to remember everything. And then the dream, and I was like, that makes sense in the dream. And then it switches and I'm reading a letter, or someone gives me a letter or something, and I'm reading it and it's something devastating. And I do remember this part. Like, I remember feeling like, I can't bear this. This is too much. And thinking, I cannot do this. And I feel like in the dream, I feel the world getting smaller. And I feel the grief is too big for me and I can't handle it. I can't carry it. And then at the end, it says, P.S. Don't forget this link. Or something like that, right? And the link, by the way, don't forget this. And the link was like, click on, even though it was a card, it was like click on a link or something because it's a dream. I was like, oh my God, that's right. I forgot about the second circle. And then when I remembered the second circle around me in my grief, then I could be with what I was feeling in the dream, which was a lot of grief. So a couple of things about this dream was, one, I was shocked I didn't remember it. I was like, wow, how did I forget about that dream? But also like how I was very, I think, I want to say flippant about what I talked about. So that year for me was like a huge year because I had a gallbladder surgery in April. My mother was dying. My mother died in May. And then I had a surgery in September, which is like just a few months before we did the video, where they had found a cyst on my ovary and they didn't know if it was cancer or not. So I had to go back into surgery. And during surgery, they're like, we'll know when we go in there. Now, end up not being cancer. And so they just removed my ovaries and I was fine. But, it was a year. It was a crazy year for us. For me, around my body, around my mother. And as I said in the original video, I had a very complicated and often difficult relationship with my mom. So, and plus we'd been part of a community, and the year before that had, as you said, blown apart. So I had a lot of grief during that time. And what I noticed watching myself was how flippant I was about it. I was like, oh, I've had this year, I had the surgery, and you're off camera going, well, you had 2 surgeries. I was like, oh yeah, I had 2 surgeries, which is something I can do. I can be very like, oh, it's fine, So I had surgery and I'm over it now. So I just noticed that, and I noticed that I kind of was slipping really quickly into like being a teacher or something, which is a comfortable place for me rather than being in the grief. So I noticed that. I also noticed how deeply that dream also still lives in me. So when we're talking about the weave of the years, I was thinking about like, I totally forgotten about this dream. But when I work with my own work and with people, I totally talk about this. I don't use the same language because I've forgotten the dream. But what I talk about is I talk about like how trauma can get us very, focused. Like it can be telescopic. All we can do is this one thing. It gets to be a very small place. And we don't remember that there's anything else but this very small place. And so what I work with myself and my clients with is I just talk about like widening the lens. So the lens gets very much like, this is all there is, just my grief, and that's all there is in the world, which I think we all have that experience of when something like, like when your brother died, it just became that, when I had to break relationships with my mom because she was so mean and abusive, at the time it was just about that. And it's hard to remember to widen that lens, to remember that this is not the only thing in our lives. So I work with my clients all the time, like on a daily basis, and I use this language. So it was also fascinating to me to see how much it actually had been integrated into my work and into the work I do. And I do that. I do this kind of like go in and go out. So I teach people, and I try to do that for myself too. Like, oh, I'm having this experience, and that's like one experience. And let me also remember that I have had all these other experiences that are also equally true. That if I can remember, if I can click on the link in the letter, then it widens the thing, and then I feel held. Because when I widen the lens, and I'm not alone. Because what happens is when we get into that kind of tunnel vision, because we're dealing with something very intense, and we end up being for me, I felt very isolated, and it was a lot of grief, and like I had to carry it alone. So I think that's something that you and I have in common. I think a lot of us have in common when we are dealing with things. Sometimes the way we had to deal with trauma was we had to do it by ourselves during the trauma or the trauma time. And then after dealing with the fallout of the trauma, we're also often alone. So that's that sort of small place. But, the dreams want to help expand that for us to remember that, like, no, you're not alone here. You have other people in your life. You have other places you can go. Yeah. Is there anything you want to ask me?
I mean, just how is that? Like, it just seems like a lot what you're talking about. Like, how is it to be with it now, 10 years later?
Which part?
Just like learning, like knowing both those places. I think what you're saying is that like you know both those places. You know the place where you could kind of forget about everything else, and you also know the place.
I mean, I think I have a, kind of a broader feel for what that is now. I think it's about, I think you and I have talked about this, about building up the muscle or our ability to hold things that seem contrary or contradictory at the same time, like hold two feelings at the same time. So I can hold I feel like I have this place where I can hold my deep grief that feels unbearable. I can hold that and also hold that I'm also held, and I don't have to bear it alone, but to be able to be with both those things at the same time, I think is really profound. So I don't have to switch back and forth always. I can be with both. I can let that part of me that was alone, that did have to bear it all by myself. I can be with that part and also be with this other part.
Has that changed for you? I know for me, I think that's really changed.
How has it changed?
Like looking at my own dream, I don't think I was completely there when I did the video, but I think there was a tendency to like be like, oh, just go and be with the animus, be with this male figure, go be with this energy, versus like, I love what you're saying of like, well, can you hold both? Can you hold that place where you learned how to diffuse the bomb, and also have this other place where you don't have to diffuse the bomb?
Right.
Or even notice the places where I get into the diffusion place. And even if I can't get out, like at least I can have a thread to that other place of like, I know this isn't, I know I'm lost, and I'm managing things or trying to control things. This happens for me around doing the videos even. I'll get in a space around it. I'll be like, I got to get the video done. And then I'll get on camera and I'll be like, no, just stop. I mean, it's in a way, it's like me internalizing that voice of like, just go have a beer. And then I'll come back when I'm more with myself.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's also, there's something about like, it's not about having to get out, like you said, not getting out of someplace. Like, I actually really want to honor the part of me that had so much grief that it was unbearable, because that was true. And I think that's true for a lot of us, that we've had experiences in our lifetimes that it was too much to bear. Like, and we will continue to have those experiences. So there's something about like really honoring that place. It's just both. It's like that, honoring that, and also honoring the part of me that knows that I'm not alone, honoring the part that knows that I'm held with intention and love in my waking life with my family and with friends, and also know that I'm held in my dreaming life. I mean, that was the other thing that struck me about the dream. Can I talk about that? I mean, unless you have another question.
No, go.
I mean, which was like, it was so striking to me, like the relationship I had with, the teacher or the mentor in the first part of the dream, because it didn't feel like I was in a classroom. It was just like, we were just talking, and he was just like saying, he was just giving me this piece of information, which I think we say this in the other video too, which is not like, I've only had that kind of experience once in a dream before, where it's just like very direct, like, here's the thing, it's this and this. And I was really struck by that watching it last night. Like, it's not just the little view, like the grief and being held and then going to the bigger circle. It's also this other thing, which is about my relationship with my guides, or my personal relationship with the beings in my dreams. It was very touching just to remember that part of like, I'm going to show you something, we're going to talk about it, and you're going to forget about it, but then you're going to remember. It just felt very much in that wider circle. And that part of, for me in my work, part of the wider circle is that I do have that kind of relationship with the divine, or whatever you want to call it. Like, it is very I'm very conversational. I'm not the kind of person who, I don't know. I'm just very chatterboxy when I talk to not chatterboxy, but I'm very
That seems a little pejorative.
Yeah, that seems a little. But I'm very. I mean, this is how when I pray, if I would even call that. I do it just exactly how I'm doing it now. When I'm angry, I cuss. When I'm sad, I might also cuss, but also just being my grief. Like, I don't do. It's very simple. It's a very simple exchange for me. And there's something about being and just that simple sort of like him telling me, look, I want to teach you something. And you kind of already know it, but I'm going to like say it because you don't know that you know it. It also felt that way. And so there's something about like, so I can honor the part of me that's in unbearable grief. I can honor the part of me that remembers and knows like the bigger circle. I can also honor the part of me that can just sit down and be like, teach me something. And just like, let's just talk about it. And there's actually this great ease that I have in that place. So there's something about honoring that part of myself too, which I think a lot of us don't. Like a lot of us, feel like we've got to, if we're going to get in touch with our spiritual lives, it's got to be, I better have like I don't know, a ritual or, which is also fine. I do rituals sometimes too, but like, I think for me, it was like honoring that we each have our own way. Like I have my own way of being with that energy, with, what I meet and what meets me in my dreams. And so there's something about honoring that part of myself too, which I really was struck by last night. So yeah.
I mean, I think it's one of the gifts of working with your dreams, like whether you do ritual or not. I mean, I think for me in some of my earlier practices, I would do ritual, but I didn't know how to like anchor it more in a more personal way. So in a way, a ritual for me is meant to set the container for me to go in deeper into myself, but I didn't know how to do that. And what this does for me, what dreams do for me, is they allow me to have that very personal relationship with consciousness. Or a lot of times for me, I just go back to thinking of it as a relationship with God. But whatever language you want to use, whatever practice you're in, I think one of the cool things about working with dreams is you can have your own relationship with consciousness. You can have your own relationship with the divine, with God, that you can bring into the ritual, that you can bring into whatever form of prayer that you use, or meditation, or even just being in the world or in nature. You walk through the world with a different relationship to consciousness.
So I just got something about that part because again, every part has layers. So I was raised Catholic and I went to church, but I was not strict Catholic. Like my brothers and I, my parents stopped going when I was little, but we kept going. I had this very kind of personal, and I loved going to church. We had a great priest who was very funny. But but when I started getting more conscious and like really looking at the structure of the church, I did ingest that like you can't have a personal relationship. Like I did understand from the teachings I did actually listen to, is that I had to go through the church in order to be in a relationship with the divine. Like, there's rituals. You go on Sunday, you do these rituals, and there was all these rituals. And there's something about like, there was a healing in that for me that like, because I think I've had this kind of conversation with the divine my whole life. And so it was kind of startling as a kid to be like, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing them. I'm supposed to be, I'm supposed to be like doing this at church, or maybe I should be a nun because I think this is what nuns do. I thought about being a nun for a while. I had a bunch of great aunts who were nuns. So there's something about like my confusion around like, is it okay for me to be so casual in the way I pray or the way that I do rituals? And I think there was that part of the dream also, I just really got like how that's kind of healing for me. Back then to be like, yeah, we can just sit down and have a chat about whatever you want to talk about. So it was so I just kind of got that. Again, like in the longer game, because I think there's a lot of places in the world that I want to tell you how to be in conversation with what, the mystery, the divine, God, whatever language you have. And some ways will sing to you and some ways won't. I think it's about finding your own conversation, your own way. And this just happens to be my way. It's not right or wrong. It's just right for me. So, and I think that was also another teaching about how to work with people, is like everyone has their own conversation. It's not for me to say, I think that's when our community, why I ended up leaving the community, was because I think there was a lot of things about dictating about how to be with the dream and how to be with the divine or the archetypes that came in the dream. And I just don't believe that. I think everyone has their own way. And it's about finding that way. Not my way, not Bill's way. not anybody's way. And so,
well, your way.
It's like literally, it's like
whatever
finding
your way is.
Right, and knowing that changes over time. My relationship has changed over time. It's totally different now. There's threads that are true, and it's also the feel and how I am with it is very different. So I just want to say that too.
All that.
And all that. Anything else you want to say?
I don't. I think, I feel pretty complete. You need anything else?
I don't think so. I guess I just want to say thanks for being here with us. And are you going to throw the link down below to the old video?
Yeah, it's there in the videos, but I'll send a link, put a link in the chat or the description. As always,
you can see my little diagram. It's cute.
Yeah, as always, like and subscribe. That would help us out. Share the video if you have someone who's interested in dreams or told you, I had the weirdest dream the other night. Send them the video. That's the most helpful thing.
And if you have a question, people have been writing to us. Please do if you have a question or, anything like that, please do write to us. We're happy to answer.
Yeah, someone sent me one last night with a dream. So we're going to keep doing this with the two of us? Every now and then, at least?
I think so.
Okay.
Do you want to?
I would love to.
Okay.
This was a little spontaneous. But yeah, this was great.
Thanks.
Back together again online.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Sweet dreams.